tears are very highly esteemed in Russia. And if I was to, in fact, in my book about Russia, I put on the back cover, "What have you given me, O Russia?" And my eyes are filled with tears. That's what you've given me, my dear, the gift of tears. Now then, in the West, we rather dismiss tears and are a bit sort of dismissive of emotion. People say, "I got emotional," as if there's something to apologize about. Now, it's quite different in Russia. People that are able to express their emotions are admired. In fact, almost nobody can't express their emotions. It's a very different world, a very different culture from England. And when I went to see that original icon that I told you about, like almost everybody that I knew who'd been there, I just stood and cried. What else can you do, dear? I couldn't care less about philosophic explanations. She just works on the heart. And even before I went to Russia, I met, there's a man called Malcolm Muggeridge, I remember, who was a well-known man at the time, broadcaster. He told me he'd just been to Russia, to Kiev actually. It was part of the Soviet Union then. And described Russians throwing themselves at God. Throwing themselves at God in prayer. And that just meant the world to me. That's exactly how I meditate. Always have done. And how I feel I want to approach God, dear. I'm not interested in explanations. I just want that total love, self-abandonment to divinity, to what is bigger than me. I don't even like words like divinity, it's words, to what is bigger and more wonderful than me, you know, to what pulls my heart, to what brings me to tears. That to me is a true instinct, which speaks much deeper, more meaningfully than verbal explanations of things, really. Well, I can do that too, if pushed. But I put this in first place. And I condemn the experience of, I could talk a long time about this because I've got a big 2-volume book written about Russia called Mystic Forbearance, which is just what, because God knows what Russia's endured throughout this last century. If only the West knew the half of it. But we don't. And forbearance, how is this forbearance one? It's one, and you know, perhaps the greatest quality that was admired in Russia is humility. Because, you know, humility takes you where nothing else does. And humility is the stepping stone to the less of me, the more of God. And that's really it. The less of me, the more of God. You probably heard me often say, there's one of the best introductions to meditation. It's a way of meditation itself. Just feel your feet on the ground. Even in a high-rise block of flats, the floor is still, isn't it? So if you want to access peace, put your feet on the floor. Not only put them on the floor, but actually feel them. This makes the difference. People will say, "Oh, I do. My feet are on the floor." Of course they're not. You're not aware of it. But to be aware, 100% of your feet on the floor, my dear, you'll then suddenly all that I'm talking about will be obvious to you. Because we are so inattentive in our heads, we're so absent-minded in our heads that we never hardly know what it is to feel the presence of something bigger than ourselves, even the presence of silence, let alone the presence of God. But if we only have 1% of attention on our feet, it'll be a step in the right direction. And with much practice, we might get 5% of our attention on our feet, or even 6 or 7%. You're doing very well if you attend to your feet with 10%. And if you can do it with 100%, then you're on the way to sanctity. You probably are already there. It's all to do with this crazy minds of ours, uncontrolled agitation in the mind, and then a simple exercise like that will connect us. And that, in a way, is being natural, isn't it? Because our problem is we're so unnatural. But just being attentive will solve an awful lot of problems. Let's go into the supermarket and give attention to the vegetables. See how beautiful they are. Even in the supermarket, they're still alive. Consider their life. If you buy an apple or eat it or something, ow! Can't you feel the apple saying ow? Well, if you can't, try it again, and be attentive, and you'll find that you're eating into something living. If somebody took a bite of your finger, you'd say ow, wouldn't you? Is the apple any different? It can't jump away from you, but it doesn't mean to say it's without feelings, dear. Every lettuce, everything is alive. Every potato is alive. God, I was right. I didn't half learn this lesson as a farmer. You do. You're dealing with living creatures. You know, we just about, it took us a long time to recognize that slaves were human. And then we gradually began to think of children as human, and now women as human too. Well, the next step is to think of, some people do think of animals as living creatures and try their best to look after them. Well, the next step is to look after the vegetables and the fruit and the grains that feed us. They're no less alive than anything else, are they? You see, you hardly know what I'm talking about. But if you want to know how to meditate, if you want to know how to progress on the spiritual path, there you are. That would be a very good start. A lot more use to you than reading a lot of books, I can tell you that. Because this is real. Otherwise, you're just getting something out of somebody else's head. In over 60 years of meditation, I've never had a bad or frightening experience, not once. It's a journey of love, my little love to great love. That's what it is. Come unto me, says Jesus. Holds out his arms. Come unto me. The only difficulties we encounter are in this life, are in what's called the ego. That sense of that we are separate, which of course we all are, we all have and are. That's why I've got a separate body. This is why it dies. The body dies because it's separate from God. So this is where we have difficulties, and of course they're very, very difficult indeed. And maybe that's why we're given 80 years of this life to struggle with it all and try to deal with it. A lot of people want to sort it out straight away, and it doesn't usually work like that. It's a long, lifelong practice. You've got to be patient and struggle on. Yes, there are reasons why we don't want to do it. Other things, diversions of this world. You need to. It helps to have a clear thing in mind, what you want, what you really, really want most. A lot of people come with very weak intention. It's just fashionable. It's the latest thing to do. People have some woolly idea in their mind about spirit, whatever it is. But you've got to want it, my dear. Otherwise, you're hardly likely to stay the course. You've got to want it. You know how it's written in the first commandment, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul, with all thy mind and with all thy strength. There you are. And him only shalt thou serve. Well, how many come to that meditation with that attitude? And again, quoting from the Bible, think of the many stories of the sower, for example, going out to sow the seed, and some fell by the wayside and was trodden down, and some was eaten by the birds, and others were choked by the weeds, the cares and riches and pleasures of this life, and bring no fruit to perfection. You see, it's all written there in the good book, and that's how it is. So many start with enthusiasm, and then they lack the motivation to persist when things get difficult, which they will, I assure you. It's like falling in love, dear. The honeymoon's marvelous, and then you come home to the nitty-gritty of it. It's not so easy. The kingdom of God is not of this world. That's a big pill to swallow, because people think it is. You know, on one hand, you're trying to save this world, and on the other hand, you're trying to save your soul. Well, the spirit is not this physical world. But people get very confused about it, and try to sort of ride two horses at the same time. I did. And it's only really at the very, very end of the journey that we might experience it coming together in one ultimate union. In most of life, it's not like that at all. There's this pull of the world and the pull of what's called the pull of the way, the pull of the call to the infinite. This world is not infinite. It's very, very finite, isn't it? It has limits. How do you reconcile the limited with the unlimited? Black and white, isn't it? Yes, there are many, many ways of dealing with all the dark forces, darkness and light. It's the age-old spiritual struggle, isn't it? All this goes on within ourselves. What is the darkness? That's the ego, of course. The works of darkness, the devil in us. And that is at war with this yearning for spirit, for God. And this is in every person. And so don't be surprised at what happens, what we encounter on the way. Yes, there are explanations for it all. Like again, I could talk forever on this, but I've had a lot of experience. But this life isn't a joyride, my dears. Those of you that start meditation will probably have more difficulties than most others, because you'll then take on more of the troubles of this world. Like Jesus bore the whole. Why? As it said, he bore our sins. Well, once you begin to understand what that means, you'll understand why those that take the long, hard road of meditation will end up carrying an ever greater burden. We've all got to be crucified in our own mini way. It's serious, isn't it? It's big stuff. We don't realize when we start what it's really all about. But I think that's why I've always felt the reassurance of looking up at the sky. You know, I get up very early in the morning. I go up to the church, and of course, for most of the year, it's dark at that time. And I love to pause just outside the church, look up at the sky, at my little brothers, the stars. Not so little, are they? Big brothers, the stars. Feel the greatness of it all. What is man, little man, honestly? What is man? What do we add up to? Just a puff. Look at me now, an old man. In a little while I'll be dead, just dust, got the dust. What's it all about? What's it all been for? And thank God if you start spiritual work, if you start meditating when you're young, as you did, you've done some preparation, and you might have You might have learned something you can take with you beyond the grave. That's a good thing. If you keep that in mind, that sorts out what's useful and what's useless. What can you take beyond the grave? It's big stuff. And then expand that to the whole world, you see. The world is come back to using this word sin, which is a very useful word to describe absence from the presence of God. In the presence of God, which is spirit, of course, there is no death, is there? No death, no suffering, no sign. It's light. So where does darkness come from? It all comes from the separation, see, from the light, which is, in personal terms, is the ego. And this fights for its existence. Once it feels threatened, which it does when you meditate, it comes back with even greater force. What about me? What about me? Poor me. Oh, that's a difficult one, darlings. You don't deal with that one overnight. That's a lifelong struggle.